Tonight, we will discover together the story of one of history's greatest geniuses. Colors dancing with painters' brushes on canvas, precise calculations of mechanical gears, flawless details of anatomical drawings, and of course, that legendary genius, Leonardo da Vinci. How did a life that began as a peasant girl's child transform into the greatest genius humanity has ever seen? Don't forget to like our video and subscribe to the channel. Also, write in the comments where you are from and what time it is. Sometimes these stories can take you to the narrow streets of Renaissance Italy. Sometimes we may search for lost times in Milan's magnificent workshops. Now let's dim the lights, light a candle for a light oil paint scent, and tonight let's dive together into Leonardo's enchanting world. On April 15th, 1452, in the small town of Vinci near Florence, a child was born from an illegitimate relationship. His name was Leonardo di Ser Piero da Vinci, meaning Leonardo from Vinci, son of Piero. His father, Ser Piero, was a young and ambitious notary, determined to build his future in Florence's legal world. His mother, Caterina, was a peasant girl, perhaps a local inn's daughter or a farmer's family child. The records are not clear. Leonardo, the fruit of this forbidden love, was considered a bastard child according to the social rules of that time, and this situation would affect him throughout his life. But perhaps this situation worked in his favor, because since he could not receive formal education, he did not encounter strict rules that would suppress his natural curiosity. Instead, he freely observed, questioned, and discovered. He grew up in his grandfather Antonio's house, and his childhood passed among the green hills of Tuscany, in the shade of old chestnut trees running along streams. Little Leonardo would examine flowers for hours, note the veins of each leaf, the shape of each petal, how colors changed in sunlight. He would observe the movements of insects, try to draw the flight routes of bees, analyze the wing flapping of birds. He used his left hand when writing, and strangely wrote from right to left, like writing seen in a mirror, and he maintained this habit throughout his life. This mirror writing was perhaps a method of protecting notes he wanted to keep secret. Perhaps it was the natural movement of his left hand. One of his favorite activities in childhood was sitting by the river, watching the water flow. He could examine for hours how water flowed around stones, how eddies formed, how reflections changed. These early observations would later form the foundation of his work on hydraulic engineering. When his father, Ser Piero, noticed Leonardo's drawing talent, he decided to take him to Florence. This decision was not easy because bastard children could not enter traditional professions. But art was different. This field, requiring manual skill, cared less about social status. In 1467, when he was 14 years old, Leonardo started working as an apprentice in one of the most famous workshops of the time, under Andrea del Verrocchio. Verrocchio was not only a painter, but also a sculptor, architect, engineer, and goldsmith. His workshop was like an art factory, where not only works were produced, but also knowledge. Here, Leonardo learned not only painting, but also sculpture techniques, architecture, geometry, anatomy, engineering, and many other subjects. In the workshop system, there was a hierarchy. At the bottom were apprentices. In the middle were journeymen called masters in training. At the top was Master Verrocchio. Leonardo first started with simple tasks like preparing pigments, cleaning brushes, stretching canvases, but his talent was quickly noticed. The apprenticeship years were a great learning period for Leonardo. He worked on the painting The Baptism of Christ, alongside his master, and he drew the angel figure on the left. This angel was not only technically perfect, but also had a spiritual depth. According to legend, the angel Leonardo drew was so perfect that Verrocchio decided never to touch a brush again. But this is probably an exaggerated story, because Verrocchio continued to produce art for many more years. Nevertheless, Leonardo's talent had emerged at a very early age, and the other apprentices in the workshop watched him with a mixture of admiration and jealousy. Leonardo was not only drawing, but also constantly asking questions. Why is this so? Why is that way? Making inquiries. These inquiries sometimes went far enough to question even masterfully developed techniques. During the years spent in the workshop, Leonardo breathed all the vitality of Florence, the heart of the Renaissance. The city was then the center of art, science, and trade. Great artists were being raised under the patronage of the Medici family. Another genius dwelt at every corner. The cathedral with Brunelleschi's dome was the city's symbol. Donatello's sculptures adorned the squares. Constant church visits were made to study Masaccio's frescoes. Leonardo not only developed his technical skills here, but also fed his intellectual curiosity. He learned Latin but was never perfect. He studied mathematics and discovered the connection between numbers and harmony. He thought about optics and tried to understand how the eye sees. He made anatomical observations and began to solve the secrets of the human body. But most importantly, he developed a mentality that questioned everything, accepted nothing as it was. Ostinato rigore, he would say, meaning obstinate rigor, and this became his life philosophy, the desire to perfect every detail. In 1478, he established his own workshop, but had difficulty finding customers because he had not yet found himself stylistically. His first important commission was the Adoration of the Magi, but he never finished this painting. Leonardo's biggest problem was perfectionism. He tried to improve every detail so much that in the end, he would leave the project half-finished. During this period, he drew the Annunciation, and here showed his mastery in perspective use, light-shadow play, nature depiction. But what really caught attention was that the landscape in the background was completely imaginary, because Leonardo did not draw nature as it was, but thinking how it should be. In 1482, when he was 30 years old, Leonardo went to Milan. This decision was made for both artistic and economic reasons. He could not find enough work in Florence, and Ludovico Sforza's wealthy court offered new opportunities. In the letter he wrote to Ludovico Sforza, he introduced himself. But what was interesting was that in this letter, he first mentioned his engineering skills, leaving his painting to the end. In wartime, I can build bridges, design siege machines, produce cannons, dig underground tunnels, construct warships, develop bombardment machines to destroy castles, he said, and finally added, in peacetime I can also carry out architectural projects, design canals, make sculptures, and paint. This approach showed what kind of mindset Leonardo had. He was not just an artist, but a universal genius. During the Milan period, he drew one of his most famous works, The Last Supper. But even this fresco reflected his extraordinary approach. In the Milan court, Leonardo worked as both artist and engineer. He was organizing feasts for Ludovico Sforza, designing mechanical stage mechanisms, making costume drawings, while also planning castle fortifications, developing canal projects. This versatility was the most important feature that distinguished him from his contemporaries. When drawing the Last Supper, instead of the traditional fresco technique, he used an experimental method, mixing oil paint and tempera, so he could work longer and perfect the details. That is why the work deteriorated over time, but the effect it created at that moment was incredible. Before making the fresco, he prepared for months, studied the character of each apostle, read that moment in the Bible repeatedly, analyzed the psychological state of each figure. While drawing the Last Supper, Leonardo meticulously calculated the psychological state of each figure, the meaning of gestures and facial expressions, the mathematical proportions of the composition. He analyzed the reactions of the apostles one by one when they heard Jesus' words, "One of you will betray me." Astonishment, anger, sadness, fear on each face was expressed in different tones. The guilt on Judas's face, the knife in Peter's hand, John's innocent gaze, every detail was filled with psychological meaning. The use of perspective was also revolutionary. All lines were directed toward Jesus' head. Thus, the center of the composition was clarified. The color palette was also carefully chosen. The balance of cold and warm tones, the source and reflections of light, everything was calculated. During this period, he also drew Virgin of the Rocks, and here developed the sfumato technique. Sfumato was derived from the Italian word fumo, meaning smoke, and meant softening contours, refining transitions. With this technique, he created a three-dimensional effect, added realism to figures. The Mona Lisa portrait is perhaps the most famous painting in history. But the real miracle was not that mysterious smile, but Leonardo's technical perfection. The layered painting technique he used when drawing Lisa Gherardini's portrait, light plays, perspective application, anatomical accuracy, everything was perfect. Why is Mona Lisa's smile so mysterious? Leonardo had studied the muscles of the human face, knew the anatomical structure of a smile, and using this knowledge precisely, had created ambiguity. The corners of the lips are slightly raised, but the eyes are not smiling. This contradiction added a dynamic effect to the painting. The landscape behind the portrait was also completely imaginary. An ideal nature landscape Leonardo created in his own mind. Rivers, bridges, mountains. None were real, but all were perfectly proportioned. This landscape actually reflected Leonardo's worldview. Nature should be painted, not as it is, but as it should be. But Leonardo's real passion was machinery. He would examine mechanical gears for hours, try to solve the physical laws of force transmission, research the dynamics of moving objects. He dreamed of flying, and this dream constantly led him to bird observation. While observing birds, he analyzed the structure of the wing, understood how feathers directed airflow, calculated the frequency of wing flapping, tried to solve the dynamics of air currents, and made flying machine designs. He drew the first designs of what we know today as the helicopter, parachute, tank, submarine, bicycle, automobile. Of course, with the technology of that time, it was impossible to make these, but his vision was centuries ahead. The machines he drew were not just imagination, but designs that complied with physical laws, were mathematically calculated. The river flows he observed as a child in the town of Vinci, combined with the canal projects he designed in Milan, and he also did pioneering work on hydraulic engineering. He played a role in the design of the Navigli canals, developed the working principle of water locks, designed machines operating with water power. He conducted countless experiments to understand the dynamics of water flow, laid the foundations of fluid mechanics. He was making fountain designs, but these were not just ornaments, but also engineering marvels. He developed systems that used water pressure to make music, animate moving figures. His work on anatomy was perhaps the most daring. At that time, corpse dissection was prohibited by the church, but Leonardo was secretly opening and examining corpses in hospitals, morgues. This was not just curiosity, but also an artistic necessity, because according to him, it was impossible to paint realistically without understanding the human body. By examining the structure of the heart, he tried to understand the principles of blood circulation, mapped the vascular system, learned the working principle of muscles, analyzed bone structure. The anatomical drawings he made were so detailed and accurate that they were not much different from those in modern medical books. He drew the development of the human embryo and correctly documented the stages of embryo development, examined brain structure, and tried to understand the complexity of the nervous system, struggled to grasp the functioning of the nervous system. These anatomical studies not only made him a better painter, but also contributed to the development of early medical science. By examining the functioning of heart valves, he laid the foundations of modern cardiology. The details he drew of eye anatomy are still valid in modern ophthalmology. He understood the working principle of the lungs and made correct inferences about the respiratory system. But his most surprising discovery was the nervous system. He realized that different parts of the brain had different functions. His spinal cord studies can be considered the precursor of modern neurology. When he went to Rome, he came under the patronage of Pope Leo X and established a workshop in the Vatican. But during the Rome period, he was not very productive because he saw the rise of new generation artists like the young Michelangelo and Raphael, and perhaps felt a bit left behind. In Rome, he concentrated more on scientific research, conducted optical experiments, and tried to understand how light works, solved geometric problems, and researched the connections between mathematics and art, examined fossils, and developed theories about the age of the earth. Despite the displeasure of church authorities, he thought the earth was much older than told in the Bible. During the years spent in Rome, Leonardo also made astronomical observations. The telescope had not yet been invented, but he was examining the sky with the naked eye, noting the movements of planets, trying to draw the details on the moon's surface. Before Copernicus, he had caught clues of the heliocentric system, but did not have the opportunity to develop these ideas. He also worked on botany. By examining plant anatomy, he analyzed the veining of leaves, the opening of flowers, the ripening of fruits. These studies were the source of realism in his nature depictions. Leonardo's biggest problem during the Rome period was finding a patron, because due to his effort to perfect every work, he left most of his projects half-finished, and this bothered art patrons. Pope Leo X commissioned him a large mural, but Leonardo had immersed himself in varnish research and had not started the actual painting. This situation angered the Pope so much that he said, "This man finishes nothing, thinks of the end before starting." His perfectionism was both his greatest strength and weakness, because he wanted every detail to be perfect. He could not finish any project, and this caused him to experience financial difficulties. In the year 1516, French King Francis I invited him to France. This invitation was a salvation for Leonardo, because he was no longer sufficiently appreciated in Italy and was beginning to be overshadowed by the new generation of artists. When going to France, he took his most valuable works with him: Mona Lisa, St. Anne, St. John portraits. Leonardo spent the last years of his life at Clos-Lucé Château in the Loire Valley, and during this period he was given the title Premier Peintre, Ingénieur et Architecte du Roi, that is, the king's first painter, engineer, and architect. He was now old. His right hand had suffered a stroke, but the sharpness of his mind had not diminished at all. Young Francesco Melzi was helping him, organizing his drawings, and this loyal student had undertaken the task of preserving Leonardo's notes. During the last years spent in France, Leonardo turned more to theoretical work, tried to compile his notes, began to organize the knowledge accumulation he could pass on to future generations. But these notes were not systematic, because Leonardo was not a systematic scientist, but an intuitive and experimental researcher. On one page, anatomical drawing. On another page, machine design. On another page, philosophical thoughts. This complexity made understanding his notes difficult, but also showed how Leonardo's mind worked. King Francis frequently visited him, had scientific conversations, tried to benefit from his experiences. Leonardo's greatest feature was that he never approached any subject superficially. While examining water flow, he was trying to discover hydrodynamic laws. While drawing hair strands, he was researching mathematical spirals. While examining the structure of the eye, he was working on optical physics. While drawing a flower, he was doing botanical research. For him, every detail was a research subject. Every observation opened a door to a new discovery. This approach carried him far ahead of his age, but also caused him not to finish any subject. Because the answer to every question gave birth to new questions, every discovery led to greater curiosities, and Leonardo was getting lost in this endless learning cycle. On May 2nd, 1519, he died at the age of 67. According to legend, he breathed his last in the arms of the King of France. But this is probably a romantic story, because the king was elsewhere at that time. After his death, he left thousands of pages of notes, most of which were written in mirror writing and could not be deciphered for a long time. In these notes, engineering projects, anatomical drawings, optical research, mathematical calculations, philosophical thoughts, daily observations, personal comments were mixed. Most of his notes were scattered, lost. Some were found in libraries centuries later. Even today, not all of Leonardo's notes have been collected. New discoveries are made every year. Leonardo's legacy lies not only in the works he left, but in his way of thinking. He was the precursor of the modern scientific method that did not separate art and science, blended theoretical knowledge with practical application, was based on observation and experiment. The machines he drew became real centuries later. His anatomical discoveries laid the foundation of medical science. His optical research developed physics. But most importantly, he questioned everything, accepted nothing as it was, and said, knowing is not enough. Understanding is necessary. This approach became the basic principle of modern science. The Renaissance period's ideal person, Homo universalis, was embodied in Leonardo. He was not only a painter, but also an engineer, mathematician, anatomist, botanist, geologist, architect, musician, inventor, philosopher, and many more. In today's world where specialization is increasing, Leonardo's versatility seems even more astonishing. Because he believed that knowledge was an indivisible whole, thought that every field was interconnected, had grasped the importance of interdisciplinary work long ago. Leonardo's life story, is actually the story of curiosity and determination. He improved himself without any formal education, only by observing and experimenting. He never said, "This is impossible." He always asked, "How can it be possible?"